I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Stefana Pramick. I work for the Napa County Library in the Reference Department. And tonight, my colleague Constance Oakes and I are working together to present this program, this Remarkable Journeys program for you. At the end of the program, Constance will be working with the questions and answers that you may have. We've talked with Jerry, and he would prefer that you go ahead and type your questions at any time, but they will be read at the end of the program. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. 2020, it was quite a year for us. We faced wildfires in our communities and a pandemic caused by the COVID-19 virus, just really, took its turn with us, didn't it? With international travel not possible for Jean and Jerry Hasser, they found that maybe road trips throughout several Western states allowed them to travel safely while enjoying the great scenery our country has to offer. Jerry and Jean have over the years spent a lot of time with international travel, and this gave them the opportunity to spend time on our continent. They traveled throughout Glacier National Park, and they traveled at Sierra National Park and other points in California. It's my pleasure to introduce Jerry Hasser. Okay, Jerry.
Thank you, Stefana, and welcome everyone. I hope this is enjoyable for everybody. As Stefana said, this is an unusual year, hopefully a unique year in so many ways. But we found a way to pivot, and we were very, very lucky that when we were doing these road trips, the pandemic was not as extreme as it is right now. And hopefully the time will return when trips like these are going to be available to anyone who wants to once again. So we're going to show you what we did, and we were very comfortable about the safety of our travel on each of the 3 trips I'm going to describe to you. When you're doing a road trip, a good car helps. And we have a trusty 2016 Subaru Outback, and we decided we would rather use our own car than one or more rental cars. And so if you look back, if any of you are of a certain age, you'll recognize a 58 Ford on the left and an 80s vintage Woody wagon on the right. Very heavily packed, unlike ours. We make a point of traveling light as much as possible. And it makes things easy, it makes things simple. One of the reasons we felt safe is because of the vast, wide open spaces in the Western United States. We knew we would encounter fewer crowds than we would going to other places, and we made a point of not spending time in big cities because the news at the time in late spring, early summer convinced us that those were places we wanted to avoid. So on these trips, we may have passed through big cities, but we didn't spend actual time or an overnight or anything like that in any of them. The primary destination of our first road trip was Glacier National Park, just an absolutely beautiful, outstanding place. And we took our time getting there. We went through Nevada, Idaho, and Montana to get there, and stayed there a couple days, and then worked our way back down. I'll show you a little more detail how we did that. Our first day, we left Napa and got onto Interstate 80 and went straight up in Interstate 80. Not as straight as that red line I drew, but about as straight as you can on Interstate 80 through Reno, and between 7 and 8 hours later, ended up in Elko, Nevada. Now, Elko is not a tourist destination, but it served our needs just fine because we didn't want to do any marathon drives, and an 8-hour day in the car seemed about right. And there's a brand new, beautiful, clean, sparkling Hampton Inn right off Interstate 80 in Elko. And they were observing all the appropriate safety precautions of cleaning the rooms, only having limited numbers of people in elevators, no gathering areas, things like that. So we felt very safe, very comfortable, and we had a nice, easy night there and rested up for the travel the next day. And our destination on the second day was going to be Ketchum, Idaho. So in the morning, we got back on Interstate 80 for about an hour. And you may notice just east of Elko there a little ways, there's a kind of a gray line going north from Interstate 80. Well, that represents US Route 93, which is one of the prettiest highways in the whole country. And is one that we were not previously familiar with. And we'd love to be on it again. It starts somewhere in Arizona, I believe in southern Arizona, and winds its way all the way up through the Great West to the Canadian border, going through some of the most beautiful country our nation offers. So we did that, went up through the town of Twin Falls, Idaho, which is growing quite fast, just like a number of other communities in Idaho these days. And at Twin Falls, on the north side of Twin Falls, we connected with State Route 75 in Idaho that would take us the rest of the way up into Ketchum, which you see at the top end of that red line that I drew, which is surrounded by the Sawtooth National Forest. This is how you get out of Twin Falls on US 93 going north. You go over the Snake River Canyon, over this very impressive bridge with the Snake River flowing below. So, a couple hours later, we arrive in Ketchum, which is bordering the huge resort area of Sun Valley, Idaho. Ketchum is a lovely little town, very walkable, very easy, very convenient, surrounded by mountains and ski runs, and also has this beautiful little trout stream running along one edge of the town called the Big Wood River. And we had a very comfortable 2 nights at the Hotel Ketchum, which is right on the main street in downtown. And Ketchum is also known as the final resting place, along with Sun Valley, of Ernest Hemingway, who passed, I believe, in about 1960, something like that. And they do memorialize him there quite a bit. So Ketchum's a tourist town, very comfortable tourist town, small, easily walkable. And yours truly camped out right there on one of the streets that they close to vehicle access throughout the summer. And on a normal summer, this street would be full of people. But I took advantage of an umbrella that the city had so kindly placed, along with table and chairs, while my beloved did a little bit of browsing nearby. And so you see some ski runs on that mountain in the background, those swatches of green that would normally be white in the winter, because this is a huge ski area in the winter where people come from all over the world. Ketchum is kind of lush, very, very, very green. You see my wife Jean standing there as we were walking through a neighborhood that separates the downtown from that little trout stream that goes by. Beautiful neighborhood full of lovely large homes, some of them actual log cabins. And they've got the river on one side and the town on the other, so it's a pretty sweet spot. This is an aerial view of the Sun Valley Resort, which is quite large, has any number of rental units, condominiums. It's got golf courses, restaurants, horse riding, tennis, golf, you name it. And this is the way it looks in the summer. And if you want to use your imagination a little bit, think about winter, everything would be covered in snow, at least part of the winter. And that's what draws the skiers. So we had a nice 2 nights there, had some nice meals at some nice outdoor restaurants. They were having a nice warm spell there. And then it was time to head further north on our way to Missoula, Montana. And Google Maps said the best way to go was to head north from downtown Ketchum on what's called Trail Creek Road, which goes right past the Sun Valley Resort and continues north. And you think, oh, this nice paved 2-lane road, we're just going to head north here and do what Google Maps tells us to do. Well, we discovered to our surprise a few miles later that we were on a gravel road. And this gravel road, which is maintained by the U.S. Forest Service, goes up through the Sawtooth National Forest and along a couple other national forests, going up through Idaho toward Montana, up to almost 8,000 feet. And fortunately, we weren't in a hurry, and we just took it nice and easy for about 26 miles of gravel road until we finally got back on paved road as we crossed some beautiful streams and went parallel to some beautiful streams and saw several very nice looking Forest Service campgrounds along the way. And after about another 16 miles of paved road, we reconnected with US 93 to continue north. And as we did that, part of the time we were following along the historic route of the Lewis and Clark Trail, which is very well marked and has some nice, pretty rest stops along the way. So by the afternoon, we arrived in Missoula, and they were having a heat wave there, and that was all fine too. This was the last week of June, I might point out, because our timing on this trip was governed by the opening of Glacier National Park, which I think didn't happen this year until about June 22. So it was a few days after that, during the last week of June, that we were doing this trip. So we get up to Missoula, and we're staying at this regular hotel right on the shore of the Clark Fork River. And Missoula was definitely having a heat wave. It was about 90 degrees. And people were enjoying the water and staying cool. And our hotel had a nice dining area patio overlooking the river, so we could watch the people actually surfing, because the river runs pretty quick there, and boating and kayaking and swimming and playing with their dogs in the water and all kinds of good stuff. And our hotel was on the other side of the river from the University of Montana campus, which was empty. So we did nothing was going on over there, but we could see it from our hotel. So apparently a rite of summer in Missoula during a heat wave is for teenage boys to jump off bridges into the Clark Fork River. And you can see as this young man is doing his flip, which is very impressive, from above a pedestrian bridge that goes from one side of the river where our hotel was over to the other side of the river where the university campus is. So you can see up above on another level, there's cars going by, and on the lower level is for pedestrians. And then there's another area in there too that trains use. So this young man was roundly applauded by his very impressed friends for his acrobatic diving there. And his buddies, you can see, were waiting their turn to try to do just as well. So after we had a nice dinner on the patio, we walked across the bridge ourselves without diving in the water and got to the path on the other side and strolled down that for a mile or so, and then got to another bridge, crossed back over, and strolled back to our hotel and had a lovely time. It's a beautiful town, but it was pretty quiet when we were there. So after spending a night there, our destination for the next day was going to be the park itself. And we knew we were going to have to go in from the west entrance to the park because due to the COVID pandemic, the Blackfeet Nation Reservation, which is situated on the east side of the park, had not reopened due to health concerns. And so the entrance going into the park from the east side was still closed. So we knew we had to go in from the west side. So we went up past Flathead Lake and through the Flathead Indian Reservation. The beautiful lake, which is about 30 miles long and about 15 miles wide, and was probably the biggest lake, freshwater, west of the Mississippi. We went around the less traveled side on the east side of the lake, which is full of cherry orchards, and it's what the area is famous for. Very, very productive agricultural land all around that area. We got up around Kalispell and hooked up with US Route 2 and took a short northeast direction to the entrance of Glacier National Park. And though the park was open, they were restricting the numbers of people who were allowed in. And we were prepared for that by getting a reservation at the Lake McDonald Lodge, which I'll show you in a little bit. And I want to take this opportunity to mention one of the best bargains in the entire country, which is available through the National Park Service at their website of nps.gov. You can find out information. You have to actually purchase this at a Department of the Interior facility, whether it be a national park or a national monument or what have you. It's called a lifetime pass. And we got ours a number of years ago. Anybody age 62 or older can purchase one of these for the grand total of $80. And as its name says, it's good for a lifetime, and it's also good for unlimited use. So you won't find a better bargain anywhere, and we highly recommend it. We highly recommend it. And we had one with us, of course, we were prepared. So we didn't have to pay a fee at the gate. We showed them our pass and they handed us a map and we slid right through. And because we had a reservation at the lodge, we didn't have to wait or suffer any restrictions. So we got into the lodge about midday, and it's a lovely place. I keep using that word because it fits. This is the two of us shortly after we arrived on the shore of Lake McDonald with some mountains and glaciers behind us. And we were standing on a dock that still serves the lodge, which is this. The lodge was built in the early 1900s in the Swiss chalet style. And the way people used to get to it back in the early part of the 20th century was by boat. After a long train ride and a bumpy stagecoach ride, they would manage to get on a boat somewhere else on Lake McDonald, and they would finish up at the dock. And the side you're seeing here of the lodge used to be the main entrance. People would walk up from the dock where we were standing on the lakeshore. In about 1933, the Going to the Sun Road was completed. And people were actually able to drive into the park from other places. That incredible engineering feat traverses the entire width of the park, east and west. So we only were set up for almost 3 days in the park because we also knew that the border to Canada was still closed due to the pandemic, so we wouldn't be able to access the parks on the other side of the border. So we knew also that the higher elevations in the park were not yet open, which is kind of a common situation because of the very short season. There was still snow up on the road after a certain point. But we had plenty of time to do what we wanted to do. Our room that we were able to get was on the top floor of the lodge in the middle, as you see, looking straight out over the lake with gorgeous, gorgeous views. And we had swallows nesting in the eaves right outside the window. The lobby of the park is quite unique, and with this incredible hanging lantern chandelier, which covers all 3 levels of the lobby. And the lobby is surrounded, as you can see, by taxidermy, by all kinds of heads representing the fauna of the park. This is another view of Lake McDonald, which goes for probably between 10 and 15 miles through a big part of the park. And the Going to the Sun Road goes alongside one side of the lake for several miles. It was serene here, but the first night a storm blew open the doors of our room from the outside. The trees were whistling and stuff was falling down and the rain was pouring, and then it suddenly stopped, which is what it does in the mountains. This is McDonald Creek, At this time of year, a raging torrent of glacial snowmelt, which comes down from 8, 9, 10,000 feet, works its way down to feed McDonald Lake. And you don't want to get in there because you won't come out in one piece. But there's trails on both sides of it, and it's just an absolutely impressive stream. One of the trails we walked on along one side was nice and non-busy, which is one of the reasons we went to the park in the first place. Is we were hoping to avoid crowds, and for the most part we did. Our first encounter on this trail was this lovely mule deer doe who was out foraging, finding her food, and she was not in any hurry to move aside for us. So we actually walked around her while she continued eating, and clearly was convinced that this is her park and we were just visiting. This is a smaller yet even more raging creek. This is Avalanche Creek, which comes down from a higher altitude at Avalanche Lake, works its way down to McDonald Creek, and then continues on to Lake McDonald. And at this time of year, because the snow was still melting quite a bit from the glaciers, all the creeks and streams were running very, very strong. I'll back up one bit. We took this photo from a nice footbridge that goes over this approximately 10-foot wide chasm and serves the Avalanche Creek Trail, which is a very impressive trail that starts out at the Going to the Sun Road. And there's a parking lot and services there, restrooms, etc. And that's where they closed Going to the Sun Road while we were there. That's as far up as you could go in a motor vehicle. Bicycles and pedestrians were allowed to go up somewhat further. But the Avalanche Creek Trail starts off as a boardwalk and is wheelchair accessible. Yeah, so it got a lot more use. And then about the point of this creek crossing, the boardwalk stopped and the trail became steeper, and it's a very popular trail because of the beauty, and it ends up here at Avalanche Lake, which just is an incredible place. And you can see these several waterfalls that are feeding the lake with glacial snowmelt the whole time. And once you get up there, there's several small beaches, and the lake is very placid and calm. And people were able to allow their little kids to get in the water and splash around and have a good time and throw rocks and all that good stuff. So after 2 days and about two and a half days and 2 nights, we checked the weather and learned that a big storm was coming in. The weather was going to drastically change. It was going to get cold. It was going to get wet. These things happen in the mountains, even in summer. It's not like Napa. And so we said, okay, we don't need to stick around here when it's cold and raining and wet, and we're going to move on. And the Park Service and the lodge were very accommodating. They said, hey, no problem. We'll see you next time. So our next destination was going to be the beautiful little town of Sandpoint, Idaho. So the better part of a day's drive, but an easy one, due west on US Route 2 across northern Montana and into the very northern part of Idaho to connect with US Route 95, and which drops down into the town of Sandpoint, which is on the northern shore of Lake Pend Oreille, which is an absolutely gorgeous lake. And one of the reasons why Sandpoint and the surroundings are such popular recreation areas for all times of the year. Whether it's mountaineering or skiing, snow skiing, water skiing, or what have you, it offers quite a bit. And my little red circle there is where our hotel was on the south shore of this bay, right across the water from the town of Sandpoint and right off the highway. Another nice hotel where everybody was doing what they were supposed to do, and another nice patio dining area where we could watch this fellow water ski across that bay, along with other people boating, skiing, etc. And yet another place where people could watch their kids play in the water. Little toddlers, perfectly safe, and it was all good. This is an aerial view of the town of Sandpoint, looking from the south to the north. And you can see kind of a strip of trees between the main part of the lake and a smaller lake. That's where the Amtrak tracks are. And there is actually an Amtrak station right there in downtown Sandpoint, another very walkable community. And they take a lot of pride in their town there and maintain things quite well. As you can see, they've got a beautiful park on a peninsula that juts out into the lake with a sandy beach that goes all the way around it. And they've got tennis courts and party places, their own marina, their own launching ramp, and it was clean as a whistle. So after a day and a night there, we hiked along the lakeshore, along the railroad, between the water and the railroad tracks for about a mile each way, and walked around downtown, had some really good coffee. And then it was time to head out the next day. And we were going to be on our way down to the Coeur d'Alene area at first, straight down US 95 from Sandpoint to Coeur d'Alene, a couple hours. We thought we might hang around Coeur d'Alene, but there were just too many people and it didn't feel safe to us. So we kept on going, and we had a reservation next door in the little town of Post Falls, which doesn't show up on the map here, but it's just about right on the state line with Washington, and spent a night there on the banks of the Spokane River. Nice little B&B with walking distance down to the river, people picnicking and everything good like that. Had a nice dinner there with way too much garlic, but that's another story. And the next day we headed off to our next destination of Bend, Oregon, which you can see showing up down there kind of in the lower left corner of the screen. So from the Post Falls and Coeur d'Alene area, we were on Interstate 90 over to Spokane, and then down to what's called the Tri-Cities area, which is by the state line with Oregon, where we picked up Interstate 84 and went along the Columbia River Gorge. And that, as it is well known for, was quite windy. The gorge gets lots and lots of wind most of the time. So we were watching the parasailers scooting along above the water and on top of the water, almost as fast as we were doing on the interstate in our car. And after going along the gorge for a while, we picked up US 97 to go straight south to Bend, Oregon, which is a really neat town, one of our favorites. It was still windy in Bend when we got there, but not as windy as up in the gorge. Windy enough to blow the flag straight out up above there at the top of that smokestack from one of the old lumber mills that have been repurposed. And down on the surface of the Deschutes River, though, it was pretty calm. As you can see, people were just floating by, having a nice time. We had a hotel on the bank of the river that we're shooting this photo from. And then there was a nice footbridge going over to what they call the Old Mill District, where they've got this repurposed lumber mills, which go back to the heyday of Bend as a big time lumber town many years ago. And this area has been quite nicely redeveloped, full of restaurants and shops and a theater and condominiums and walking paths on both sides of the river, and on the other side of the river, a big concert venue. And we had a nice meal under one of those black and green umbrellas there and got rested up. And unfortunately, we got there late enough in the day that the stores were closing. They have a nice REI there along with some other stores, but we weren't able to take advantage of them this trip. So our final day, there's another view looking from Bend to the west. The scenery there is gorgeous throughout the year. And this is a view of one of the peaks of what they call the Sisters, which are 3 mountain peaks that run up the Cascade Range in the spine of Oregon that separates the Willamette Valley, where I-5 runs up and down the state, where Portland and Salem and Eugene are. That separates that from the interior of the state, where Bend is. So our last day of the trip, we were going to head back home, and we continued south on US 97. We weren't able to stop at Crater Lake because it wasn't open yet, because it was one of those years when that park opens late, because they're high enough altitude, they get snow that lingers till well into the summer on some years. So we passed on by and continued on along the eastern shore of Klamath Lake and passed through the town of Klamath Lake in Oregon, and on a diagonal to the southwest, going past the north side of Mount Shasta until we finally hooked up with Interstate 5 at the town of Weed in California. Then we continued south to Redding, where we knew we wanted to stop at this really cool bridge over the Sacramento River. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. It was designed by a Spanish architect named Calatrava, and they call it the Sundial Bridge, and because of the effect it has from this structure that follows the sun around, you can tell the time. And it crosses the Sacramento River just west of Interstate 5. So if you get to State Route 41, you peel off, and a couple miles later, you pull into the parking area, and it's called Turtle Bay Park, a small bay in the river. And this is a footbridge, and there's facilities there. There's a snack bar and restrooms. There's actually a really nice Sheraton hotel there as well that we stayed at once before. So this is a really nice, fun, convenient place to stop. This is what the bridge looks like from the surface. It's the surface is reinforced. I'm not sure if it's glass or plexiglass or whatever, but it's see-through. So as you're walking across it, you get to look down into the river. And it's quite fine, and it's parks with trails on both sides. Great place to stop. So after that, little rest stop there, we got back on Interstate 5 and made it back to Napa in time for a nice dinner at the Oxbow Market. And that was the extent of that trip. One moment. So by August, we were getting the itch to get out again. Everybody knows how that feels, I'm sure. And so we started looking around again and decided we could safely return to someplace we had visited about 20 years earlier. And we knew we could get there easily, safely. So we got reservations in Sequoia National Park, and we kept our trusty lifetime pass in the Subaru and went on down. And it doesn't take too long to get there. You go over to the Central Valley, go down State Route 99 until you get to Fresno, and then you go due east on State Route 180, and you climb up to about 77,000 feet altitude. And as you can see there, the yellow line, it gets pretty twisty once you start climbing up there. You go through some cattle area and things like that as you climb up through the foothills east of Fresno. And it gets pretty, and it wasn't too smoky. It wasn't ideal like it was the last time we were there 20 years ago, because there were already some fires in the Central Valley in August, and that was making things a little murky. But by the time we got up to the altitude of the park, it wasn't bad. We had reservations at the same place we stayed 20 years ago, called the Waxahachie Lodge. This is the main building, which has the reception area and the restaurant and the gift shop, etc. Like most national parks this year, they weren't using the dining room, which they normally would. But if you look to the left on your screen, you see a bunch of snow next to the wall. Well, that's a deck, and it's a very large deck, and there was no snow in August. So that's where they fed everybody. And it worked out really well, because the little kids could look out over the side of the deck and see all the wildlife running by and munching on the ground, and it kept them busy until the pizza came. So the lodge was built in the 90s to replace an area in a more sensitive part of the park that had been around for a very long time down by what's known as the Sentinel tree. And that was getting overused, and the trees were being stressed. So they took out all the lodging and facilities down there to give the trees a break, and they built this place in an area of the park that wasn't as sensitive to being used. So that in addition to this main building, there's 4 or 5 satellite buildings which are set up as in motel fashion. It works quite well. This is the #1 tree in the park. This is the General Sherman tree, one of the oldest living things on Earth and one of the biggest living things on Earth. Um, Several hundred feet high, several thousand years old, depending on who you ask. And if you look closely on the screen, you see at the bottom a full-size human. And that gives you an idea of the scale of this baby. And when you're down there, it takes 5 minutes or so to walk all the way around this thing on the path they've got. They don't let you get too close because they don't want the tree to be stressed. But it takes a minute or two. 5's too long. But it takes a minute or two to walk around this thing. And if you try to look up to the top, your neck tells you, no, that doesn't work so well. You got to stand back a little bit because it's just too high. But it's a beauty and it's easy to get to. There's a large parking lot a couple hundred feet above it, and they have a very nice paved trail with very nice stone steps leading down to it. It's about 200 feet up and down. And then for folks who aren't as mobile, there's another smaller parking lot a little bit below the tree with a smooth paved path that, say that 3 times, that is wheelchair accessible. So they've got it figured out pretty well so everybody gets to get a close up. And they've got lots of good trails and paths all through the park. Quite a few of them are paved. I was kind of surprised. Here's an example of another tree that demonstrates the ability of sequoias to withstand and recover from lightning strikes and fire. Jean is standing at the base of this one. It doesn't have a particular name, but it was pointed out to us by a ranger as being a prime example of the hardiness and the sturdiness of these trees and what they are able to withstand. This small grove of trees was also pointed out to us by the ranger, who happens to be walking along that path there. He very kindly made sure we didn't make a wrong turn on the way here. And this one's called the Senate because it's a bunch of guys standing around. And somebody named this one the Senate. There's another larger grove that somebody named the House. And then there's a few that are named after various generals from the 19th century. And all of that naming was done probably at least 100 years ago because the park's been around at least that long. So we were encouraged by this friendly ranger to walk inside this grove and just feel the vibe, if you will. And it was very serene. And these trees are very huggable. So we did, and it felt good. Here's an example of a tree that's been toppled with a very athletic young lady who figured out how to get up this way from, I think she probably went down to the other end of this toppled tree, got on and managed to find her way to the root ball. The biggest peril for the trees, according to the ranger we spoke with, is wind, because they do have a fairly shallow root base, kind of like redwoods, which are their cousins, so they can get toppled. Another example of what a toppled tree can look like, and the Park Service's philosophy of you don't necessarily take it out, you might just want to cut through it. And to give you an idea of the size, I'm 6 feet and I easily cleared it, got under there. This little place is called Tharp's Log, kind of unique. The entrance where I'm standing there was where the base of a downed tree used to be. And this fella named Tharp, who was one of the early Caucasian pioneers in the 19th century, wanted to run his cattle in a meadow that's right next to here. And he saw this downed tree, so he repurposed this hollow tree into a part-time residence. So you go inside there, where it's dark in there, and there's a table and chairs, and he even added a stone fireplace and made himself comfortable back in the day. As we were walking around, we were fortunate enough to see several young black bears foraging in the woods. And we never saw mama bear, which was perfectly all right with us. because if you encounter mama bear and the kids are around, it can be a bit awkward. So these guys were all pretty small. They're probably yearlings getting out on their own for the first time. And we saw 3 of them that day, just out foraging, minding their own business. So we were there for several days, 3 days, 3 nights, had a nice time. And it was good to connect with nature and get out once again. And an easy drive home after it was over. So by the time October rolled around, as probably everybody remembers, we were all getting tired of the smoke from the wildfires, and we decided our lungs needed a break. So we looked around. There's websites that were very, very helpful. I think one of them was called airnow.gov or something like that. Easy to find, easy to look up. And they had maps which were interactive and kept up to date, and we could figure out where the air quality levels were all around the state and into Nevada, Oregon, whatever. And we could also see what they were projected to be based on the way the wind was blowing. So after looking at several of these for a few days, we came to the decision that the best place for us to go to get some clean air was going to be the Central California coast. So we decided to head down to San Luis Obispo County, and the town of San Luis Obispo, which is a lovely university town for Cal Poly, and also someplace we had not been before other than to drive through, which is the small town of Morro Bay right on the coast. So first day we went down. We went down straight down US 101, several hours to get to the town of San Luis Obispo. And when we got there to the hotel where we had a reservation, our car thermometer said 102. We said, well, that's too hot. So fortunately, our room was ready at a hotel right off the highway. So we dropped our bags, got back in the car, and headed out to Morro Bay. And by the time we got there, 15 minutes later, the car thermometer said 76. So, okay, this is working. This is the way you do it. It's really easy. Morro Bay is right on the coast, and it's about 15 miles due west of San Luis Obispo. And so the highway you see called Cabrillo Highway is actually State Route 1, and that goes out to the coast and continues back up north. And then a little bit below, running parallel, is Los Osos Valley Road. And both of those go straight out from San Luis Obispo to the coast. So we got out to Morro Bay, right about the north end of that peninsula that separates the bay from the ocean, and had a nice little hike on a combination gravel path and boardwalk. So lots and lots of birds and waterfowl. Stretched our legs, relaxed, and stayed nice and cool. Got a first look at the town, and then as evening was coming on, we said, okay, we can go back to our hotel and we can go back to San Luis Obispo and get some dinner. So we did, and we found that on an October Saturday evening, San Luis Obispo, which normally would be just bustling with all kinds of college students and other people, was really quiet because most of the college students weren't there. But the town was still going. They were doing their best to accommodate people with street closures and parklets and outdoor dining opportunities. And this is a nice little example of a walkway that goes through a mid-block in the downtown shopping area. And there's one of our, I don't know if you can read it clearly on the slide, but one of our favorite Barnes and Noble bookstores straight ahead there. And it was still working, so that was good. So we spent the night in San Luis Obispo because our hotel that we went at Morro Bay wasn't available till the next night. So we got up bright and early, had a nice breakfast Sunday morning on a street side cafe, and then headed out on that Los Osos Valley Road to the small community of Los Osos. We're going to make hiking a priority that day. And at the edge of Los Osos is Montaña de Oro State Park, which is mostly right along the coast with lots of hiking trails. And on our first one, we were getting pretty close to the cliff edge. We stayed on the trail, and we got reminded by this park sign that we weren't supposed to get any closer. And just about the time we walked up to be able to close enough to read the sign, these two vultures landed on the sign to kind of lend emphasis to the fact that you don't want to go there, because if you do, you're going to be their dinner eventually. Another view, a little closer to the edge, but still safe, still on the trail, shows how the fog comes and goes there all day long. And there's a sandy beach down there and an arch, and the surf is going pretty strong most of the time. And then there's also inland trails and horse trails and all kinds of trails going all the way through the state park. So we spent most of the morning hiking and then got to our hotel in the town of Morro Bay. That long white building down in the lower corner of the screen was our hotel, called the 456 Embarcadero Inn, because that's its address. And we're on the south end of the Embarcadero, which is the quiet end, thankfully. And the Embarcadero runs along the water line, and all the shops, most of the shops and restaurants are up and down the street. And then on the back side of those buildings, there's a walkway as well. So it's really easy to walk around and see what's there and enjoy some fine meals outside on the waterfront, have a nice time. Our room was on the top floor of the inn, and we had a nice little patio, which as long as the sun was out, was nice and warm, great place to sit and read a book. You can see Morro Rock in the background, and working waterfront across the street. And then, half a block up, you start getting into all the nice gift shops and restaurants and all that sort of good stuff. That's the iconic Morro Rock, kind of the centerpiece and main vantage point, if you will, or whatever, for the area. It's been there for centuries. Morros are basically old volcanoes, and they're all over the place down there. And this one happens to be right on the water. And that's where the entry to the bay is from the ocean. And so we made a point of going on a little hike out there. And at the very end, under the rock, is this huge cairn farm, if you will. People have been piling stones up there for decades, making these cairns, and Gene has found this one here, and they come in all sizes. We saw them anywhere from less than a foot tall to as much as 7 or 8 feet tall. This one in particular caught our eye. This little group here reminded us of some kind of Hindu shrine on the Bay of Bengal or the Indian Ocean, something along those lines. We don't know why people picked this place to do it, but they did a long time ago, and they're still doing it. It's pretty fun. And as we walk along the shore at the base of the rock, we could see, they don't look like much on this slide, but what they are is sea otters. And there's probably hundreds of them in that area. And what they do at night is wrap themselves in kelp to help them stay warm in the chilly water of the bay until the sun comes up the next morning. They sleep on their back. And just as we were walking by, the sun was starting to hit the water there, and they were actually starting to move around and unwrap themselves from the kelp. And they go cruising along the waterfront. You can be having lunch or dinner at a waterfront table, and you'll see them cruising by along with the paddle boarders and the kayakers and the boaters. So after 3 nice nights down there, we found out that the air quality was improving in Napa. And we figured, okay, we can head on home, but we're in no hurry. So we got on State Route 1, and we figured, okay, we'll take the scenic route up through Big Sur. We started out in the morning after a nice breakfast, went past Cayucos, a small town on the waterfront, and the small town of Cambria, which is a neat place to stay. Kept going past Hearst Castle, which was closed as a state park due to COVID. Kept on going. And as we got up into the Big Sur area, we realized they'd had their own giant wildfires that had started back in August. And here we were in the first week of October. And it was called the Dolan Fire. And it burned many thousands of acres and many square miles, all in that Big Sur area, and some of the state park campgrounds were still full of firefighting equipment and firefighters who had commandeered the campgrounds in order to fight this giant fire. And some of them were still there because they were still putting out hotspots. This is an example of the size and the ferocity of that fire. Most of the time, as we were driving up Highway 1, we could see that the highway had quite effectively functioned as a fire break. But sometimes even that got overwhelmed, and the only fire break that worked was the Pacific Ocean. And not only did this go for about 20 miles north and south, it went probably for that much inland as well. Very impressive. But we did get through it, and they did finally get it put out. And they're still working on Highway 1 around Big Sur, slides, etc. I don't know if that's ever going to get done. So there was still some one-way traffic control, but the traffic was quite light, so we didn't have any problem getting home. And that was it. Thank you. So.
Yep. Well, thank you. Let me get my video back here. Oh, there we go. Thank you for sharing those multiple adventures with us.
You're most welcome. I hope that people get some ideas for when it's safe to get out and about again.
And if anybody had any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box that's at the bottom of the screen. I personally had a question about the lifetime pass.
Yeah.
So does each person have to get a pass?
No,
Or
one will work for an entire household or carload.
Oh.
They're not transferable, but but I'm not sure how they're doing it now. We bought ours at least 10 years ago, so we each got one. So we have one we have two vehicles, so we have a pass in each vehicle. But when we were traveling, we just had one with us, and it's good for the whole car.
Oh, that's cool.
And someplace like some national parks, people stay at lodgings outside the park. And we've done that, say, at Bryce. And then, so if you're going back in the park every day for 2 or 3 days while you're there, you just show your pass each time. If you didn't have a pass, you'd have to pay each entry. So a single entry for a car in a national park these days is $36.
Wow. Okay.
So
well,
that's
that's a good deal.
Yeah, you can beat it.
Okay, we have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
This says, thank you for this wonderful experience. Are there favorite travel references? What do you use, I guess, to decide where you're going? Or
yeah, if people are interested in national parks, national monuments, the National Park Service website, which is nps.gov, is extremely helpful. And in different parks, the lodgings and the services and the restaurants are run by a couple different companies. But if you go to the Park Service's website, there are links to get you to the reservations sites for any of the lodgings. And they lots and lots of information about what's open, what's not, what's working, what's not, because a lot of parks are very seasonal. So that's where I would start if anybody's interested in national parks. And before I forget, as of October of last year, military veterans are eligible for free entry to any facility of the Department of the Interior, which includes all the parks and monuments and some other things, national historic parks, things like that. So all veterans are now eligible for free entry.
great. Okay, another question. How did you handle your laundry?
We took just enough so that we didn't have to do any.
Perfect.
Oh, yeah, which this, the longest trip was the one we took to Glacier, and that was basically a full week. So and it was summertime. And so, we were able to pack just enough to get us through that. For international trips, longer trips, it's a different story. You got to get creative. Sometimes you have to rely on hotel laundries, that sort of thing,
Mhm.
or the hotel, the sink in the hotel room,
Yeah.
depending on what you have. But this was easy because we had a little more space because we had our own car.
Mhm. Okay, to what extent do you plan your trips?
Pretty extensively. Um, we we understand that there will always be some kind of surprise and we have to be flexible, but we like to, for the most part, know what to expect from one day to the next. We don't typically show up at a hotel and just hope they have a room. We like to do reservations.
Okay, let's see, another question. I know in your international travel, you work with a company. How do you select the hotels where you want to stay?
We've had really good luck with an outfit called Overseas Adventure Travel. And they are a sister company with what's called Grand Circle Travel. One side of it focuses on land, the other side focuses on cruises with small ships and small groups. And they select all the lodgings. But before we connected with them, we did our own research, which is easier now than ever. We like the ease of use of booking.com for hotels, and they have some B&Bs also. We haven't yet used Airbnb, but we assume we will at some point. We've also done some international bicycle trips, and there's a lot of good companies that do that. And we had good luck with biketours.com, but that's one of several. So it's, with the internet, it's easier to do research now than ever.
Okay, another question that says, this was fun. What made you feel safe about COVID in the bed and breakfast you stayed in?
We communicated directly over the phone with the husband and wife team that ran that, and it's a small operation. And that part of Idaho and that part of the country for the most part, but especially that part of Idaho, northern Idaho, had virtually no positive tests. It hadn't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
And they said, nothing's going on here. The virus simply hadn't reached them yet. So it was safe because it was almost like a normal time. Now, unfortunately, since then, it has found them, and they're having as much trouble as a lot of other places, which is very sad. But it was good timing and good luck for us.
Okay. Are there favorite or most reliable websites for weather conditions? Or do you still rely on Google Maps?
Google Maps we use mostly just for finding routes and getting directions and things like that. Weather.com, the Weather Channel, or just whatever weather app is on your smartphone or your computer. I think they're all pretty accurate. Okay. Or, you can look for the National Weather Service, which is where a lot of these other apps and websites actually get their information.
And our final question is, where are you thinking of going next?
Well, Jean wants to take our local grandson to Italy. She was going to take him last summer, but that didn't work. So she's still hoping to take him to Italy. He's going to be 13 this spring, and she's hoping to take him to Italy after school's done early this summer. And she and I were planning on a combination land and cruise trip around the Iberian Peninsula, covering Portugal and Spain last year, and that didn't work. So that's still on the list. And we're hoping to take a cruise with the same company on a small ship in the Baltic in August, to start in Copenhagen and end in Stockholm. So we're not giving up.
No. Well, those sound exciting. Here comes Stefan is back.
Yeah, here I am. Thank you, Jerry. It was really interesting and very exciting to see that, we don't have to travel that far away, and yet there's so many wonderful things, here in our country and just down the road. And you brought that to light. So I really appreciate that.
You're
Thank
most
you so
welcome.
much.
I hope people enjoyed it and it's helpful.
I think so. I want to remind people that we are here on the third Thursday of the month. So I look forward to seeing you next February 18th. Maury Angel, she's going to come and she's going to talk about her adventures in Colombia, and she calls it Color for Colombia. So I look forward to seeing you then. So thank you all for joining us. And Jerry, thank you so much for bringing this wonderful presentation to us.
You're most welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.